Hi there, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's July 16th. Today we celebrate an English poet who was good friends with Alexander Pope. We'll also learn about the French painter who was famous for his landscapes. We celebrate the co-creator of a new hybrid of popcorn called Snowflake. And we'll also celebrate some of the flowers of the July garden with some poetry. Today we grow that garden library with a book that helps us explore the world of botanical fragrance. And then we'll wrap things up with the story about a legendary Indiana botanist. But first, let's catch up on some greetings from gardeners from around the world in today's curated news. First up is an email from Amber in North Dakota, who's wishing her mom, Dorothy, a happy birthday. In their family, gardening is a legacy that was started with Dorothy's mom, and then Dorothy passed it on to Amber. And I always say that teaching our children to garden is one of the best gifts we can give them. Now, the other thing that I wanted to share with you was a question that I asked in the Facebook group earlier this week, and it was this: if you could only pick one, what herb is your must-have for your kitchen garden? Well, this single question drew in over 30 responses, and I think it's safe to say that the overwhelming favorite is basil. But runners-up include cilantro, rosemary, parsley, and thyme. And when I asked Debbie Gibson what she did with her rosemary and thyme, she said, "It's my go-to seasoning for beef, pork, and vegetables. It's a flavor combination that we really like for roasts, stews, and roasted veggies, rosemary and thyme." So if you're a new gardener and you're planting an herb garden and you have no idea where to start or what to do with these plants, just start with rosemary and thyme, and you can add it to so many dishes. Barb O'Brien shared that she loves cilantro. That would be my son John's favorite. Barb uses her to make a cilantro lime vinaigrette, and she also uses it in salsas and guacamole. Now, for my son John, I use my cilantro to make a cilantro rice, kind of my own spin on the kind of rice that they serve at Chipotle, which is his all-time favorite. Mark Sanders' must-have herb is rosemary. And Chuck Langenhop said he puts sprigs of rosemary in his turkey before roasting it. Heidi Bertels likes parsley for its taste and aesthetic value. Kathy Brown and Vicki Van Blaricum love chives. And then we get to Julia McMurdy and Patricia Chandler Newport, who simply could not pin it down to just one. Patricia wrote, "The reality is I can't choose one. I must have basil, thyme, oregano, parsley, cilantro, savory, tarragon, chives, rosemary, sage, lovage, lemongrass, mint, lemon verbena, and probably other stuff that I'm not even thinking about right now." And Julia McMurdy wrote, "Immediately I thought basil, but then I thought, nah, what about parsley and thyme? And then I thought about rosemary and sage and the wonderful mint that adds depth to my cocktails and tea. That's not a fair question." And you know, she's right. It wasn't a fair question. It's a very hard question for gardeners to pick their favorite herb in their kitchen garden. It's like being asked to pick your favorite child. Anyway, that was fun. Now, if you'd like to participate in the Gardener Greetings segment, just send your garden pics, stories, birthday wishes, and so forth to Jennifer@thedailygardener.org. You can also share anything garden related in the Facebook group for the show. And finally, here's a gentle reminder that while you're at home, you can listen to the show on your smart speaker. Just ask Alexa or Google to play the Daily Gardener podcast, and they will. Which reminds me, there was a question posed by Mary Beth Hughes, who wrote, "Can only the latest available podcast episode be played on Google? I tried asking for an earlier date, but I couldn't access it." Well, Mary Beth, this is a great question. And of course, I had to Google it, ironically, to see if I could find an answer. And the answer is that Google cannot do this yet. You can't ask for a specific date or a specific show. But you can ask for the latest episode. You can say something like, "Hey Google, listen to the Daily Gardener podcast," or "Hey Google, play the latest episode of the Daily Gardener." Now, if you want it to back up an episode, you only have to tell Google to play the previous episode. So, if you were starting out with today's episode, but you really wanted to listen to yesterday's episode first, you would say, "Google, play the latest episode of the Daily Gardener podcast." And then when she starts to play it, you're going to interrupt her and say, "Okay, Google, play the previous episode." So it's kind of clunky, but it does allow you to move around just a little bit. Think about it as a fast forward or reverse command for playing podcast episodes on your smart speaker. All right, here's today's curated news. Today's curated post is written by Tarragon Furman over at wellandgood.com, and the post was called 9 Hanging Garden Ideas That Will Turn Any Small Space into a Lush Indoor Jungle. Now, what I loved about this post is that Tarragon advises something I completely agree with, which is if you have a small space, you have to go vertical. And this is where hanging gardens come into play. Now, Tarragon gives 9 examples of wonderful hanging garden options, along with really inspiring images. Her list includes a plant wall, hanging bottles, kokedama, so fun, something you can do right now as a craft to pass the time in your home, and so pretty, using wall containers, installing an above-the-bed shelf. This is such a great idea and something I just might do in my daughter's dorm room, assuming she gets to go to college this fall. And then the last 3 are a doorway garden, a wire wall garden, and a scrap wood garden. Now, some of these ideas may be old hat to you, but I guarantee there's at least a few in there that are new and exciting. And hopefully there's something in there that'll be very inspiring for you. So go ahead and check it out. If you'd like to read this post for yourself, just head on over to the Facebook group for the show and type in the word hanging in the search bar, and this post will pop up. Then next up is a post that I wrote about tarragon. It's one of my favorite herbs. Did you know that tarragon is an artemisia? Like all plants in the Artemisia genus, tarragon is gray and silvery. Artemisias were sacred to Artemis, and there are over 180 species, all of them ornamental. Most are medicinal, and of course, a few are culinary. Tarragon is a graceful plant when it is fully grown, and it's never demanding. And tarragon can stand shade and a heavier soil, so clay is not a problem. Now, French tarragon has a subtler aroma and flavor compared to Russian tarragon. And tarragon has a sweet taste with hints of anise. And here's a fun fact. Tarragon is an integral part of Dijon mustard. The tender, fresh stems of Russian tarragon can be cooked and eaten like asparagus. And tarragon tea stimulates the appetite, especially when it's been lost due to illness. Another benefit of tarragon tea is as a sedative. So drink tarragon tea to help at bedtime or with hyperactivity. And here's something valuable to remember about tarragon. The flowers generally do not produce viable seed, so you have to propagate tarragon through root cuttings, rhizome sprouts, or stem division. As an example, the French tarragon commercial growers dig it up in the fall after the foliage has been harvested, and then they cut the roots into short pieces. More tarragon. All right, that's it for today's gardening news. Now, if you'd like to check out my curated news articles and blog posts for yourself, you're in luck because I share all of it with the listener community in the free Facebook group for the show, the Daily Gardener Community. So there's no need to take notes or track down links. The next time you're on Facebook, just search for the Daily Gardener Community and request to join. I'd love to meet you in the group. Here's today's brevities. Today is the anniversary of the death of the English writer and poet Elijah Fenton, who died on this day in 1730. Elijah's tomb is ornamented with a pair of sleeping angels, and the gardener and poet Alexander Pope composed his epitaph. The first two lines are inspired by the poet Richard Crashaw. This modest stone, what few vain marbles can, may truly say, here lies an honest man, a poet blessed beyond the poet's fate, whom heaven kept sacred from the proud and great, foe to loud praise, and friend to learned ease, content with science in the vale of peace. Calmly he looked on either life, and here saw nothing to regret or there to fear. From nature's temperate feast rose satisfied, thanked heaven that he had lived and that he died. Elijah Fenton is remembered for working with Alexander Pope and William Broome to translate the Greek epic poem, the Odyssey. Pope had specifically requested Elijah's help with the major undertaking. Elijah is credited with many wonderful verses, like wedded love is founded on esteem. And gardeners will especially appreciate these verses. Beware of flattery, 'tis a weed, which oft offends the very idle vice, whose shrine it would perfume. And in a book about Elijah Fenton, it says, it is late justice to Fenton to point out how often the footsteps of the greater poet may be tracked to his garden plots, how the tones and something more of his verses are echoed in strains which give them their best chance of immortality. Pope used to say that Fenton's Ode to Spring, which was addressed to Lord John Gower, was the best ode in the English language since Dryden's Cecilia. Here's an excerpt from Elijah Fenton's Ode to Spring. Over winter's long inclement sway, at length the lusty spring prevails, and swift to meet the smiling May is wafted by the western gales. And today is the birthday of the artist Camille Corot, who was born on this day in Paris in 1796. Corot was a French painter famous for his landscapes, and he inspired the landscape painting of the Impressionists. Corot's quotes about painting are especially inspiring to gardeners. Here's a little sample of his sensitive perspective on the natural world. Corot said, "Beauty in art is truth bathed in an impression received from nature. I am struck upon seeing a certain place. While I strive for conscientious imitation, I yet never for an instant lose the emotion that has taken hold of me." And here are some of Corot's words about nature. See if you can recall having a similar observation after spending a long day in the garden. Everything is vague, confused, and nature grows drowsy. The fresh evening air sighs among the leaves. The birds, these voices of the flowers, are saying their evening prayer. And imagine sitting beside Corot as he wrote, "I hope with all my heart there will be painting in heaven." I think gardeners would say, "I hope there is a garden." And today we wish a happy heavenly birthday to Orville Redenbacher, who was born on this day in 1907. Orville was a USDA scientist and the co-creator of a new hybrid of popcorn called Snowflake. It was lighter and fluffier than traditional popped kernels, and Orville became a household name with his commercials for his popcorn. To this day, Orville Redenbacher is the #1 selling popcorn in the world, and Nebraska produces more popcorn than any other state in the country. In Unearthed Words, today we celebrate some of the flowers of the July garden. This first one's from the garden author Jeffrey Charlesworth on the Physoplexus camosa, or the devil's claw, or the tufted horned rampion. We like people not just because they are good, kind, and pretty, but for some indefinable spark, usually called chemistry, that draws us to them and begs not to be analyzed too closely. Just so with plants. In that case, my favorite has to be Physoplexus camosa. This is not merely because I am writing at the beginning of July, when the plant approaches maximum attractiveness. And here's one from the English poet Algernon Charles Swinburne about love in a mist. Light love in a mist, by the midsummer moon misguided, scarce seen in the twilight garden if gloom insist, seems vainly to seek for a star whose gleam has derided light love in a mist. All day in the sun, when the breezes do all they list, his soft blue raiment of cloud-like blossom abided, unrent and unweathered of winds and of rays that kissed, blithe-hearted or sad, as the cloud or the sun subsided, love smiled in the flower, with a meaning whereof none wist, save two that beheld, as a gleam that before them glided, light love in a mist. And finally, here's one from the English poet John Cleveland. It's called The Marigold. The marigold, whose courtier's face echoes the sun, and doth unlace her at his rise, at his full stop, packs and shuts up her gaudy shop. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Sensual Garden by Ken Drews. This book came out in October of 2019, and the subtitle is Exploring the World of Botanical Fragrance. And here's what the author Joel Lample said about this book. It's a brilliant and fascinating journey into perhaps the most overlooked and underappreciated dimension of plants. Ken's well-researched information, experience, and perfect examples now has me appreciating plants, gardens, and designs in a fresh and stimulating way. Ken Drews is a celebrated lecturer and an award-winning author and photographer who's been called the guru of natural gardening by the New York Times. Ken is best known for his 20 garden books that have been published over the past 25 years. And after reading this book, I immediately began to pay much more attention to fragrance in my garden. This book is 256 illustrated pages of 12 categories of scented plant picks and descriptions for the garden, from plants to shrubs and even trees. You can get a copy of Sensual Garden by Ken Drews and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $40. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Today, in 1987, the Indianapolis Star announced the release of the biography of the legendary turn-of-the-century Indiana botanist Charles Clement Deem, who went by Charlie. This biography of Charlie was written by Robert C. Kriebel, editor of the Lafayette Journal and Courier. Charlie Deem was a self-taught botanist, and he also served the state of Indiana as a forester. And there's a little story about Charlie in this article from the Indianapolis Star that I thought you would enjoy. In his home herbarium, Charlie kept a loaded pistol in a desk drawer. One time, Charlie was hosting a guest in his home, and he brought the guest into the herbarium, and they began chatting about plants and taxonomy. Charlie gave his guest quite a fright when, without warning, he opened the desk drawer, pulled out the gun, and fired 2 or 3 shots through an open window. And all the while, Charlie uttered some disparaging comments about the canine ancestry of a rabbit that had been terrorizing his garden. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Wyoming, Minnesota with the help of Paige Mance, Brooke Bierbaum, Kiana Rayleigh, Maddie Doyle, Natalie Decker, and Eric Begay. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media. You can follow the show on Instagram, and listeners always have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. All the stories and books that are featured on the show can be found over at thedailygardener.org, thedailygardener.org. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. Last but not least, you can share your own gardener greetings on the show by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.